can satisfy then the utility and the return they need while they're diminishing their business. So part of the broader public policy issue is, can you shift from the rate to the bill?
Two quick responses that would seem to be diametrically opposed to one another. One, if you want to get uniform national standards, you typically fly right smack into the face of powerful trade associations who will devote whatever amount of lobbying power is necessary to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the way to get around it is by getting 6 or 7 states to pass different standards, at which point the trade association reverses course and wants a uniform national standard because they want to make 6 different kinds of refrigerators. The other answer, though, with regard to the built environment is that I'm not sure it's a good idea to have uniform national standards. And this is a guy who 30 years ago argued aggressively for federal building energy performance standards. But when we're now moving into an area where we're talking about a level of efficiency we didn't even dream about 25 or 30 years ago, a lot of that is pretty situation specific. And the ideal building in Anchorage is just really different than the ideal building in Phoenix or in Atlanta. When we designed the living building ordinance here in Seattle to allow people who are aspiring toward a very high degree of efficiency to avoid some prescriptive standards as long as they were getting the right kinds of performance, the things that we were arguing for just wouldn't have made sense in a different geographical area. So there may turn out to be some real wisdom back. Oh, I sound like I'm running for president, but some real wisdom back with our founding fathers and mothers who came up with this concept of a highly decentralized sort of thing for the various responsibilities that were not given to the federal government explicitly. I think, and the other side of that is, if you've got Seattle, that is fabulous, and if you've got any number of 1,000 cities that spring immediately to mind, it's really not good because they're not going to push very hard. Maybe you can have a minimum federal standard and then allow the states to go farther than that, or the cities to go farther than that, but not less.
Yeah, and in fact, what we're seeing is progress on this and many other related issues is happening at the city level and the state level, not the federal level. So you don't necessarily want to be waiting around that. I'm like that.
So, Rob, you gave the example of California. I'm going to put on my international affairs hat here, and I was wondering, what are examples of policies in other countries that should either be emulated or avoided in order to create better built environments here in the U.S.?
Well, so one of the classic examples is Denmark. There are other European examples and Japan as well. They've used a mixture of policies, and there are structural cases as well, and they're small, right? So it's just easier. But we've been talking about utility incentives a lot. That's a big factor there because the utilities there are actually publicly owned, and they're co-ops and they're community owned. And so that, right from the get-go, sets up a different incentive structure. And so I think the experiments that we're seeing at the city level here with municipal utilities, for example, like SCL, are quite interesting. And then they just have a whole set of standards, codes, and incentives that push in that direction. So just very strong building codes, very strong incentives for all sorts of things that make it easier to have more sustainable built environments, like district heating, insulation requirements, etc. So it's the answer, as it typically is just that you kind of have to do all of the above across a whole different range of things, and you actually can get to a pretty amazing place. I mean, Denmark has now increased its energy use in absolute terms over the past 3 decades or so, and they have half the energy use per capita that we do. So there, California is the standard in the U.S. They haven't increased their per capita energy use, but Denmark actually has kept their absolute energy use flat for a few decades. So I don't know if you guys have any other examples or things not to do.
What are the disadvantages of not going first? So, yeah, Denmark, it's been about 5 years ago, I listened to a talk by I think the term was the energy minister, who in 1973, shortly thereafter, it was his job to deal with this crisis. They were effectively 100% dependent on foreign energy, primarily oil. And he's talked about the journey and the holistic view, and certainly what a government, if that government is set up, which ours is not, to step in and make decisions for its population. But the whole idea, I was talking with the DPD construction land use group, about energy codes, because they're out now starting a conversation, what will the 2012 energy code look like? And the current way that we treat energy codes is we're looking for an efficiency improvement, energy efficiency improvement over the current code. And so the conversation was, so at what point can we go to absolute, net zero, for example? When should buildings, through an energy code in Seattle, become net zero? When will we get that conversation? And can we push it far enough out that it doesn't affect anybody's current political term, it almost doesn't affect your current assets. So could we say in 2025 we can have an energy code that will be net zero? Okay, 2030. When can we get a conversation that starts to look at absolute terms, like Denmark has done? They're looking at absolute issues and put that stake in the ground, and then back it up. Okay, so then what is the 2012 energy code that is toward that? If we do incremental change for 30 years, you never get to net zero. I mean, our construct of doing this one iteration at a time doesn't really put the idea in place. So Denmark, what they've done in their buildings, every building has an absolute energy allowance, and it would be similar to the goal Seattle City Light is doing, where it will have a stake in the ground. If you use less than this, we will incent you. In Denmark, it's the opposite. If you use more than this, we'll penalize you. So it's really the idea that for society you could step in and put a rating system in for buildings that actually is good for everybody. You know, I don't know how we would do that, but that's what we need to move the needle.
And this gets into a really broad range of things that we can't get into here, of the nature of your political system and your economic system. Denmark decided that it was going to become a world leader in wind power. A little itty-bitty country. It's probably the greater Seattle metropolitan area sort of level of population. They're dominating the wind industry now around the world because they made a decision that they were going to be going that way and to give the proper set of incentives. China was not manufacturing photovoltaic modules 12 years ago. Last year, China manufactured 70% of all the photovoltaic modules in the world by governmental incentives to people in companies to start manufacturing. What is our reward for that? And I would say that the Chinese government in that regard did precisely what those of us in the solar industry have begged the American government to do for the last quarter century. They did it. Now we've slapped a 35% tariff on them. Instead of incenting our industry to compete against them, we are going to be crushing them for building this really strong, powerful, aggressive industry. In terms of the policy issues, the one thing, if I could have something on the production side that I'd love, temporarily, it's a feed-in tariff. This is what's worked in Germany, much of Europe, now Korea, Ontario. The problem with buying something that is incrementally a little bit more expensive, like solar today, is that everybody out there thinks that solar is going to be cheaper tomorrow. So let's buy it tomorrow, and then because nobody's buying it today, it never gets cheaper tomorrow. It just pushes stuff up. By having a feed-in tariff, you will give the people who buy it today a reasonable rate of return on today's investment, paid for by all of the other ratepayers. If they buy it tomorrow and it's cheaper, they will get only a reasonable rate of return on that investment. So there is no incentive not to move ahead right away. And that's just produced these spectacular results in places where it's worked. Once you get past a certain level of penetration, then it runs into a series of complications, but we're nowhere near that level in the United States. I'd love to see that happen here.
So one other example in Denmark, how you can tie it to economic development, they have a policy, and I'm not sure of the current construct, but the idea that hybrids became the only new vehicle that you could buy 3 years ago or something, where best available technology has a short runtime to be proven out, and then it's adopted as the standard. And it actually drives their economic engine. So you can invent and bring technology into Denmark because there's a very short window to prove it out, and then it's going to be mainstream and required. And so you can actually get our whole technology engine moving if we could assure that people could invent and people would buy it if it works.
Yeah, Japan actually has the same idea with appliances. They, you know, the top 5% efficient appliances basically have to go into the broader market after being proved out. So that's an interesting model. And just one other point, I don't know if everyone knows this, but California actually does have a 2020 net zero new buildings target. And they're doing exactly what you suggested, which is how do we get from here to there in 3 steps as opposed to let's do 10% more.